Good evening, and welcome to New Foundation Unity. This evening, we are beginning a new series, an exploration of the faculty of judgment. I just learned yesterday that Mark is traveling, but he will try to be at a computer very soon. And so if you have any technical difficulties, do try emailing him at mark@truthunity.net. Here we have our phone-in time starting around 8 o'clock. And the phone number here is 816-301-6304. 816-301-6304. If you have questions along the way, please make a note of them, and then do not be shy to phone in. And so, as we begin our time together, I invite you to close your eyes and turn within. Begin to center yourself in that living, loving presence at the center of your being. As we view the world from this perspective, we see that our faculty of judgment is sharpened, for we are looking from that point of view, which is the God point of view. It is the source of all that we would ever need, require, and desire. And as that Christ within us wakes up, so do the 12 divine faculties, which support that Christ and serve as the channels for its full expression. And for a few moments in the silence, let us rest in that awareness of judging righteous judgment in the silence. And as we begin to return our attention to this time and this place, we survey our world with greater awareness. We find our discrimination is sharper, that it's easier to see the difference between the sheep, those docile, innocent, divine ideas, and the goats, those resistant, oppositional thoughts. We are able to say more easily yes to truth and no to error. And for an awareness of this truth, which sets us free, we are so grateful as we come more and more into a possession of that promised land. And we are so grateful in the name and through the power of that living, loving Christ presence. Amen. Linda, there is a set of handouts there for you, along with a folder. And if you would like that board to write on over there, please help yourself. And so we begin tonight with this most fascinating, at least it is to me, exploration of the spiritual faculty of judgment. So let's begin with what is the faculty of judgment. And basically, it has to do with our decision-making power, our power of choice, our ability to discern and to discriminate. In the book of Judges, we see different combinations of faculties all working with this faculty of judgment. And so we get a sense that judgment cannot work by itself. It has to work in cooperation with other faculties. For instance, if we judge from our own personal experience, from appearances, we would find that our judgment is limited and can very well be judgmental. Right? If we are in that centered place in the silence within ourselves, we can see the big picture. And then our sense of discrimination, our sense of decision, what is the right decision, what is infallible guidance, is very obvious to us. This is what we call a foundational faculty. Foundational because along with Peter, Andrew, and John, James, in the New Testament, one of Jesus' disciples, represents that faculty of judgment. And those four are a foundation. All right. Two sets of brothers. We have Peter and Andrew, faith, and that strength which supports our faith so it doesn't waver. And we have James and John. John representing the faculty of love, and when we put love and judgment together, we have wisdom, we have compassion, we temper that judgment with mercy. More than any other faculty, this faculty of judgment has to do with the conditions that we find in our bodies, our state of mind, the quality of our relationship, and in general, the quality that we enjoy in all of the affairs of our outer life. So it behooves us that once we become aware, excuse me, of that faculty, that we become very watchful as to how we use it. It can create more suffering than perhaps any of the other faculties. because it acts like a boomerang. The location is important. The location of this faculty of judgment is right here, the solar plexus, the pit of the stomach, and it is very close to the faculty of love, John, which is located in the cardiac plexus. Excuse me. Those two are connected by tissues. And they are naturally connected because they are brothers in consciousness. Okay. So if you say something or do something through unwise judgment, you feel it in the pit of your stomach. It is in the pit of your stomach where the food you digest, the nutrition of it, is distributed to all parts of your body. Emotions go along with it. It's a center of intuition. We talk about our gut feeling. So extremely important faculty. And so we will consider several judges tonight in the book of Judges. But before we do that, I would like to put the book of Judges in the context of the Bible. Last time, in our last series, we had the, quote, conquest of Jericho. Jericho, the walled city of Jericho, called the Moon City, representing the intellect, was not won with weapons, chariots, horses, or battering rams, or whatever else they used in those times. But it was the walls came tumbling down as a result of the priests, representing our connection to spirit, walking around the walls 7 times on the 7th day. What did that do? That created an energy field around those walls, lifting the vibration to the point where the walls could not stand. They fell of their own accord. Have you ever tried to, by force, stamp out your intellect? Right? Guess what happens if you decide that you're going to get rid of that intellect, that it leads you in erroneous ways, and you end up empowering it, because resistance gives more power. But you can go around it, you can go beyond it quite effortlessly, as was done in the Battle of Jericho. Now, the interesting thing is that they thought, and sometimes we think this too, that once they got into the promised land, that the work was done. Perhaps you have heard a minister or teacher say, or perhaps you have read about Charles and Myrtle Fillmore, who said that this practice of going into the silence is extremely important, and that it will eventually lead you to owning that state of consciousness of the Christ, living from that place. But once you have access and you think, oh, it's all done. Wrong. It's not all done. That is just the first step. And as you infuse that transcendent energy into consciousness, everything begins to shift, and the things that don't belong there begin to surface. The Israelites, they had that same notion they thought that once they had entered the promised land, that it was done. And they were wondering how come all this fighting was still going on and how it was so difficult. How all these indigenous tribes, these people were already established there. These indigenous tribes were fighting Israel. And the tribes of Israel themselves were fighting one another, and they began to look for an explanation. And by the way, I have on my website, newfoundationunity.org, if you click on newsletter, you will have, there's a button there that says download the handouts for this course. So on your handout, you find not only a list of judges, but you find a description of the pattern that the Israelites go through by way of an explanation of why this promised land is so elusive. I have, as I don't think that probably a lot of you have had a lot of notice about this class, so I have written the pattern on this board. I'll describe it and I'll hold it up several times. Perhaps you remember from the last series of classes that we talked about this group of men that were called the Deuteronomistic editors. This came about, this committee, as it were, came about as a result of discovering the book of Deuteronomy in the reign of King Josiah. They found this book, and all of history through Joshua, through 2 Kings, was rewritten according to this pattern. And here's what the pattern looks like. First of all, the Israelites are always breaking their covenant and worshiping, quote, foreign gods. That's called idolatry. And many even forsook their own religion. Apostasy. Big sins. The major sins. They were told not to make foreign alliances. They were told not to intermarry, but they did, because the Israelites had been nomads, and here they were in a territory where agriculture was going on, and so as a result of intermarrying, they came to adopt the gods of the agricultural people in the land of Canaan, namely Baal and Asherah. Now these, quote, foreign gods are fertility gods. If you're in agriculture, you want rain, you want good soil, you want sunshine, and so they prayed to these gods for those things that would make their crops grow. Well, that created a conflict for the Israelites, because being monotheistic, it's like one God, one power, one presence, one mind, and Yahweh can take care of everything. So we ask ourselves, what are the foreign gods that we worship? Okay. What are all the things that we put ahead of God? It could be a personal relationship. It could be some outer authority. It could be stuff, possessions, status, money, all kinds of things that are put in the place of God. So then what happens? The people are oppressed. This is step 2. The people are oppressed because the Lord, responsible for everything, gives the Israelites over to the enemy. And then they have these wars and fighting. And they are oppressed, and they are dealt with cruelly. And so, step 3, they cry out for help to the Lord. And the Lord has sympathy for them and appoints a judge. Okay? Judge is God appointed. And this judge is what leads them back to a state of peace. Now, there's a period of rest following that, but as soon as the judge dies, they go back to their old behavior, and sometimes it's even worse than the previous behavior. So this is a pattern that is destined to repeat itself. All right, so I hope you can see this. The apostasy, number 1, that is, they forsake Yahweh for other gods. Second, they are oppressed. So they feel the cruelty, they feel the repercussions of their unwise judgment. And then they are delivered after they cry out to the Lord. And then there's this period of rest, and then the pattern repeats itself. This is all spelled out in the handouts. So if you missed it, you have another chance. Okay, now let me illustrate this with some stories from the Bible. There's a list of judges on your first sheet, and this pattern is first described in chapter 2 of Judges. So if you have your Bibles handy, and I hope you do, and starting with verse 11. So we're in chapter 2 of Judges, verse 11, and I'll read. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and served the Baals. Okay, there it is, the apostasy. And they forsook the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the prophet, of the peoples who were around about them, and bowed down to them. And they provoked the Lord to anger. No. Does God get angry? No. But the law, we are not punished for our sins, we are punished by them. So if you make an unwise decision and you are worshiping other things other than God, that has a consequence. So here it is described as God getting angry at them. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to plunderers, who plundered them, and he sold them into the power of their enemies round about, so that they could no longer withstand their enemies. Whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had warned, and as the Lord had sworn to them, and they were in sore straits. Okay, next step. Deliverance. Now I'm in verse 16. Then the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the power of those who plundered them. And yet they did not listen to their judges, for they played the harlot after other gods and bowed down to them. They soon turned aside from the way which their fathers had walked, who had obeyed the commandments of the Lord, and they did not do so. Now, here's the part about the judges. Whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge. So they're God-inspired, these judges. They're not like judges in a court, but they're judges who deliver the people from the evil that has befallen them. And he saved them from the hand of their enemies all the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who afflicted and repressed them. But whenever the judge died, they turned back and behaved worse than their fathers, going after other gods, serving them, and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he said, because this people have transgressed my covenant, which I commanded their fathers, and have not obeyed my voice, I will not henceforth drive out before them any of the nations that Joshua left when he died, that by them I may rest Israel, whether they will take care to walk in the way of the Lord, as their fathers did, or not. So the Lord left those nations, not driving them out at once, and he did not give them into the power of Joshua. Okay, so there we have that one. And we come, if you are in chapter 3, we come to our first judge, which is Othniel, starting with verse 7. Here we have the pattern again. And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, forgetting the Lord their God, and serving the Baal against and the Ashtaroth. That's the feminine consort with Baal. Therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of Cushan the king of Mesopotamia, and the people of Israel served them 8 years, and then raised up a judge. They complained and raised up a judge who delivered them, Othniel, the son of Kent's, Caleb's younger brother. Remember, Caleb was one of the spies sent into the promised land with Joshua. The Spirit of the Lord came upon him, and he judged Israel. He went out to war, and the Lord gave him, the king of Mesopotamia, into his hands, and his hands prevailed over Canaan, Cushan, whose name is too hard for me to pronounce here. So the land had rest 40 years. Then when he died, here comes the pattern again. Then we go to Ehud. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Okay, so here comes the pattern one more time. Now this judge, because Othniel means the strength of God, he had that inner strength that was God-inspired. But then we have Ehud. Now this is an interesting story because Ehud was extremely clever. It says he was a left-handed man. Now, a right-handed man, most people would carry a sword in their right hand, but he could conceal his sword because he used his left hand. So he was able to assassinate this king surreptitiously, and that is how the Lord used him as a judge to assassinate the Mesopotamian king. Right, interesting. They all have, different different faculties that they're working with, but you can see the role of judgment. And after this assassination, then there's Shamgar, but there's not enough there to talk about him, so I'd like to move to Deborah. Deborah, who is truly a fine judge. And the part about Deborah begins in chapter 4, starting, of course, with verse 1. And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. So once the judge is gone, the pattern starts over again. Now, the difference with Deborah, her name means fine discrimination. Bees are noted for fine discrimination, and her name means bee. And so then the Lord sold them into the hand of Jabin, king of Canaan. Now, the Canaanites were those who lived for material living. All right, everything material, the Canaanites. And the commander of the army was Sisera. Sisera represents that, and you can look all these names up in the Metaphysical Bible Dictionary, but kind of like that boiling over, just aggression, as people get sometimes when they are greedy for power or greedy for countries or greedy at all. And so extremely aggressive, boiling over. And then, of course, the people cried out to the Lord for help. For Jabin, the king, or Sisera, the general, had 900 chariots of iron. So they had a military advantage. 900 chariots of iron. So there were these weapons on all three levels, and zeros mean emphasis, all right? And oppressed the people of Israel cruelly for 20 years. Now, 20 years, I'm assuming that you're studying your numbers and you understand the role of numbers here. 2 means duality, in this case, human consciousness, good and evil. We believe in good and bad, good and evil, double-minded man, all right? And he add a 0 to that. And that's quite established in consciousness. So they were oppressed for this state of consciousness. Deborah was already a judge. She was already established, and the people cried out to her, and instantly, she calls on Barak. And I've looked up all these names here for you. So she calls on Barak, whose name means lightning, thunderbolt, a flaming sword, the fire of the executive will. All right, so he represents that power of will, but he has the good sense to respond to Deborah, who gives him very exact directions. And she says, here's what she tells Barak. She summoned Barak, the son of Ahinoam, from Kadesh in Naphtali. Naphtali represents the faculty of strength, and said to him, "The Lord, the God of Israel, commands you." Notice she's not saying, I command you. She's saying, the Lord God of Israel commands you. Go gather your men in Mount Tabor, okay, high place. Gather your thoughts in that high place of consciousness, taking 10,000 from the tribe of Naphtali. That's 10,000. Wow. 10,000 from strength. And the tribe of Zebulun. All right, Zebulun is order. So we have strength and order. And I will draw out Sisera, the general of Jabin's army, to meet you by the river Kishon with the chariots and the army. And I will give him into your hand. Okay, now I did a map here, and I don't know if you folks at home can see this, but I'll hold it up. Okay, so here is the promised land. The Jordan is the dividing point. It's in between the Sea of Galilee and the Red Sea. Jordan goes right there. Now up north here is Mount Tabor, right up here by the Sea of Galilee. And here is Naphtali, and here is Zebulun. Okay, and so they're all gathered there. So think of that as you prepare for some big enterprise. You take all your thoughts up into that high state of consciousness and follow the guidance that comes to you. And so Deborah is leading Sisera to the river of Kishon. That is the second most important river, and it's over here. And why is she doing that? Because the rainy season. Why would she choose the rainy season? Because in the mud, those big wheels of chariots are easily bogged down and they get stuck in the mud. And that's exactly what happened. Okay. When we misuse our faculty of judgment, we get bogged down in the mud. Right. Okay. And so only Sisera escapes. The general escapes. The whole rest of them are done for. Also, important piece in this story is that once Barak decides that he's going to do the job, he says, I will only go and do this if you will go with me. So it's extremely important that we always take with us that fine sense of judgment, discrimination, discernment. And also, once he accepts the commission, she says, oh, and by the way, you will not get any glory out of this. So think of that. He's willing to take this on without getting any glory. All right? Because the glory is to God. She says to Barak, she says, for Sisera, the general, will be delivered into the hands of a woman. Now, that is the interesting piece of the story. There was a tribe called the Kenites, and the family of Heber decided they would separate from the main tribe. And so they had a little village, or they had their own dwelling in a separate place. And so when Sisera has fled, he comes to this to this little outpost, as it were, thinking that these Kenites are going to be sympathetic to him. It's just one of those tribes in Canaan. All right. Now, what he doesn't know is that they are now allying themselves with Israel, this particular family. And so he asks for refuge there, and she says yes. They're still very high on hospitality. He asks for water. She gives him skim milk because people, when they were poor, they could not afford water. Water was very scarce. And so she gave him skim milk, and he lay down, and she had a rug that she put over him. He said, "If anyone comes looking for me, say that no one is here." That's how much he trusts her. Bad judgment, right? Have you ever trusted someone and been betrayed by that? All right. So, what her name is Jael, or Jael, and it's also Anael, and it has that meaning of being a wild mountain goat, indicating to us that even the lowest part in consciousness, once it is able to, it can lift itself up through supporting spirit. And so she is supporting spirit here. While he is asleep, Sisera, she pounds a tent peg into his head. The head representing the intellect. All right. We once acted this whole story out in ministerial school, and I was assigned the role of Deborah, who sits under a palm tree. I love that part. All trees are significant because they represent the human nervous system, that distributes nourishment from its roots through to all parts of the body. Palm tree is especially auspicious because out of the fiber of the palm tree come construction materials. They built huts and buildings out of the fibers of the palm tree, and the palm tree also bore fruit. So it's like the fact that she sits under a palm tree indicates that she is able to bring that foundation in consciousness out to bear fruit in the relative world. So, very important piece of Deborah. Okay, so here we acted out this story, and it was pretty funny because one member of our group did not like taking the part of Jael, who pounded the tent peg into the head of Sisera. Actually, it's like the head is a symbol of the intellect. It's where the intellect comes from, the center of intelligence. And the temples right here, that in essence cut the intellect off from its source of nourishment. So if you interpret it metaphysically, it's not as serious. It's not as violent as it often sounds. Okay, and so, and then again, at the end of this story, it says that there was peace for 40 years, meaning that Deborah, as a result of her judgeship, had established a foundation for peace in combination with all these faculties. Remember, she represents that faculty of judgment, fine discrimination. She worked with Barak, who had that active will, but he was willing to allow God's commands to direct him. And he was guided to draw on the men from Naphtali, strength, all right, and from Zebulun, order. So these, when you're planning an enterprise, you want to get all of your thoughts and feelings in a place of strength, which we say divine order. And then if you follow guidance, no matter how logical or illogical it seems, you will have success. And Deborah was definitely a fine judge. She was, in my view, a model judge. And a woman, amazing. She not only represented that faculty of discrimination, but because she was a woman, she had that intuition. She had that intuitive guidance that led her to make all those crucial decisions that she had to make, because the people were crying out to her. And so she had to do something about this oppression by the Canaanites. Materialistic thoughts, thoughts of acquiring more, trying to get more by giving less, trying to get your good at another's expense. These are all attitudes of what we would call Canaanites, metaphysically. All right. But she was in a place, in a high, exalted state of consciousness, where she could draw on that infallible guidance, and we have that within us as well. She was already established as a judge. We have infallible guidance for every moment, and we don't trust it, generally speaking. We fall back into that judging by appearance. So let me, once again, we're getting near the question time. So first, I will review the pattern. Okay. The people did evil in the sight of the Lord, which meant that they abandoned the one power and one presence, and they sought and bowed down to other gods. And I invite you to ask yourself what you put before God. That has consequences. You feel the boomerang come back to you, and you suffer. That faculty of judgment, made from a personal standpoint, brings more suffering. And after a point, you cry out to God. In our desperation, we cry out for God, and God appoints a judge. All right? And God is with that judge. Judges are God appointed. And then that delivers us. It's like the people going through the wilderness in the Exodus. That they cry out because there's no water. Then they cry out because there's no food. And each time they go to Moses, and Moses acts on their behalf, and they are delivered, and then they are back to God. It's like that. This pattern goes on. And it's very much like us in that spiritual growth is not linear. All right? It's not linear. We have this notion that we enter the promised land and suddenly our challenges are gone. We're going to have this life of bliss and walk into the sunset and live happily ever after. It's like we're almost seduced into the transcendent with the thought that this is our hope for a full spiritual development, and it is. But what we don't realize in the beginning is how much there is layers and layers of beliefs and attitudes, race consciousness, things placed there by parents and teachers that have to be released. And we have to stick with it, and not once we get what we want, then we go back to it. I mean, we do that sometimes. But we go through these cycles pretty much like the people did in the time of the judges. But in a state of desperation, some inspiration comes through. And so there's some truth to that. And then here I have the references, Othniel, and you can look up their names. And Ehud, this means God is strong. And I don't remember what Ehud means, but Shamgar and Deborah. All right, those are the first 4 judges. We don't have a lot of material about the other judges, but we do, and next week we will talk about Gideon. The other thing, here I have done a metaphysical interpretation, which I will now tell you my overall interpretation. But here is the meaning of Deborah, the palm tree. Oh, and by the way, that palm tree is located between Ramah, which is that state of pure consciousness, and Bethel. Bethel was where Jacob's ladder took place. And it's that place in consciousness where that fine discrimination takes place, where the two of human consciousness becomes one. All right? Remember that Jacob said, the Lord has been here and I knew it not. The Lord is here and I did not know it. Okay? And it's in the hill country of Ephraim. Ephraim is will. Okay, Barak. All right, we talked about what Barak means. He's the executive. He represents that executive power of will, who is willing to allow God's guidance to come through. Here are the 3 things that he is instructed to do. He follows guidance. He doesn't question. And here is Sisera, that he is instructed at the exact moment when he is to go down to Kishon, this river, where all the chariots get stuck in the mud. And Jael, the woman who, even in a low state of consciousness, even in that sort of raw physical state of consciousness, is able to lift herself spiritually by serving the cause. Okay. What else did I want to tell you here? Oh, and so here, as an overall interpretation, and I invite you to do this for yourself, but when we join together that intuitive judgment, Deborah, and the directive power in understanding, Barak, when those two are joined, then there are victories over the enemies of the children of Israel. Children of Israel are those immature thoughts, but aspiring toward spiritual consciousness. They represent the real, enduring spiritual thoughts, and the enemies are the material, transitory thoughts. All right. Barak, the general of the armies of Israel, does not go into action without good judgment. Very important. Nor do we go into action. we need to seek first that inner kingdom and receive the guidance. The only way to overcome the opposition of adverse thought is to understand the law and keep constantly unified with judgment based upon inner discrimination. This is represented by Deborah accompanying Barak to battle. He would not go without her. He said, I'll go into battle if you come with me, and if you won't, I won't go. So, very good judgment he had. It's 8 o'clock, and the last thing I want to say is that following this story of Deborah is the song of Deborah. And it's much, much older than the story itself. Praising God. And it sounds like it is being written to Deborah and Barak together. And it gives glory to Jael. You know, it's an amazing little piece of literature. I'll just read a portion of it. And then if anyone out there would like to call in and make a comment or ask questions. This is found in chapter 5, the Song of Deborah. Then sang Deborah and Barak, the son of Abinoam, on this day, that the leaders took the lead in Israel, that the people offered themselves willingly. Bless the Lord. Hear, O kings, give ear, O princes, to the Lord I will sing. I will make melody to the Lord, the God of Israel. Lord, when thou didst go forth from Seir, when thou didst march from the region of Edom, the earth trembled and the heavens dropped. Yes, the clouds dropped water. The mountains quaked before the Lord. Sinai before the Lord, the God of Israel. In the days of Shamgar, son of Anat, in the days of Jael, caravans ceased and travelers kept to the byways. This is a reference to a previous time when communications were so bad that people couldn't exist in the villages. That's why the travelers kept to the byways. The peasantry ceased in Israel. They ceased until you arose, Deborah. So this is celebrating the accomplishments of Deborah, who arose as a mother in Israel. When new gods were chosen, then war was in the gates. War was shield of spear to be seen among 40,000 in Israel. My heart goes out to the commanders of Israel, who offered themselves willingly among the people. Bless the Lord. And so it goes on. It's really a beautiful poem. Some scholars will say that this is a contradiction, the prose version with the poetic version, but I just see this poem as a celebration of Deborah and of Jael. Then it says, awake, awake, Deborah, awake, awake, utter a song. Arise, Barak, lead away your captives, O son of Abinoam. Then down marched the remnant of the noble. The people of the Lord marched down for him against the mighty. Goes on praising all the elements of the army. Then it talks about the rainy season, and then most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, of tent-dwelling women most blessed. He asked water, and she gave him milk. She brought him curds in a lordly bowl, and her right hand to the workman's mallet. Right hand is always the hand of truth, righteousness, all right? To the workman's mallet. She struck Sisera a blow. She crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. He sank, he fell, he lay still at her feet. And so it goes on. And it concludes with, so perish all thine enemies, O Lord, but thy friends be like the sun as he rises in his might. And the land had rest for 40 days. So that's a kind of introduction to all of the judges, and a more detailed investigation of the kind of judge that Deborah was, an established judge. She was established under that palm tree in a state of fine discrimination. And so she was a good judge. She improved the condition of the people. She responded to the cries for help. She gave orders, infallible guidance that ensured the success of Barak against the Canaanites, and a celebration in song. So I invite you now to call and make a comment. First, I'll ask you, Linda, is there anything that you wanted to ask? And particularly ask if you have any questions about how this relates to you, either the pattern involved, because ultimately metaphysics is not just a matter of interpreting words, but it's a matter of seeing how through this spiritual interpretation of the Bible is a valuable insight for each of us in our own lives. So that's the point that needs to be, those are the points that need to be uncovered in the study. So within us all, there is a Deborah, there is a Barak, there's a Jael, there is every one of those characters, and there is a Sisera and a Jabin. All right, all of the characters exist within us, but where is our consciousness centered? That determines the outcome of this enterprise. Okay, so I always have a difficult time getting people to call in. I was hoping that would change. And sorry that Adine didn't make it, because she always has comments and questions. And please feel free, do not be shy, Linda, if you want to ask something. And also, I need to know if there were any technical difficulties as well. So the telephone number, 816-301-6304. 816-301-6304. Hi, Bob. Oh, what did I do? Call again, Bob. Somebody else was calling at the same time. Okay. Sorry, Bob, but it got cut off. Call again. Hi, Bob. Hello? Hi, Bob.
Let me turn my computer
Yeah.
off. Sorry.
Okay, that's okay.
I have a question. One of the general comments and observations and criticism, especially of Old Testament literature, is that this God is the avenging God, and He's always destroying, and people do something, they step out of line, and He destroys their families, He destroys this, and I guess I really thought you did a great presentation tonight, and I like the idea of the patterns. I've never seen this. I never approached this before like this. But could we say then, and you just help me because I'm a bit confused. Can we say that the Lord that's doing all this is the inner Christ within us, and when it's because I think you said we're not punished by God, we're punished by our own actions, our decisions, our judgments we make. But I guess the question is, can you clarify that?
Yeah.
Could we say that the Lord in this situation in the Old Testament is could we say similar to the inner Christ within us? And if that's the case, how does this work in this going back and forth and judgment and making decisions that have grave consequences for us?
Okay, good.
I don't know if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, I do.
I'm trying to
And
work at, clarifying what's in my mind, and maybe it's not coming out clearly. But
no. I understand. The Lord of the Old Testament is the Christ of the New. But remember that we are in the Old Testament, and their concept of the Lord was law. They understood God as law. And so this is particularly relevant to the faculty of judgment. The law is that as you give forth, so you get back. All right. And so if you are bowing down before other gods, you get the consequences immediately from that. It's not about the Christ that is doing it to you. It's the violation of the law. It's just like if you, stepped off of a cliff. The law of gravity isn't angry at you or punishing you, but you did not mind the law, which was that, if you don't listen to gravity, you're going to hurt yourself. So that's one point, understanding God as law. And that was the first understanding. Of course, as they go along, they understand God as more than that. Deborah seems to be one who is centered under her palm tree, and that is more applicable to her. But I would liken this whole pattern to a process that I see people go through time and time again, that they begin the practice of meditation. And when I say meditation, I mean something very specific, of going into the silence, that they like it for a while, and then when the purification starts up, they go back to their old habits, thinking that it doesn't work. That is particularly true of when students in Unity first start working with that law of mind action. They get very excited because there's an empowerment there, that they can work with the law that gives them a sense of power, and they can make things happen. But then, without establishing a consciousness of abundance, or a consciousness of health, or a consciousness, in this case of Deborah, of fine discrimination, then they experience that it all goes away, and that the benefits they received are no longer there. Now, in meditation, I have an easier time if I'm working with people over a period of time. I can remind them that it is a journey, that it's a process, and that when you enter into the process in the right way, meaning, as we saw in the Battle of Jericho, you enter into the process which is effortless and non-resistant. Success is always there, with no adverse consequences. But there's a lot in consciousness that has to be released. And sometimes if that is not understood, people begin to think, I don't think I like this. It's not comfortable. And they are still holding on to standards of the material life, if you will. I don't know. Am I answering it, or am I making sense?
I think so. Would you say then that this idea of patterns really begins in Genesis with Adam and Eve, and then with Cain and Abel, then with Jacob and Isaac, because they and you see that pattern in their relationships with others, with their brothers and their people that they are dealing with. Would you say that pattern is really even begins back then?
It even begins back then, and we see that with Joseph too. Look how full of boasting and self-centered he was in the beginning, and he couldn't use his gift in the way that it was intended. So he got sold into slavery. And you know what happens? He becomes the savior of Israel in a time of famine. And then what happened? They stayed so long in a comfortable position that nobody remembered Joseph, and they had to be led out of the wilderness by Moses. Moses, who represents the law. And so they came to understand Moses as the law. They had to wait for that unification of the promised land until David. But guess what? It lasted 100 years. The only time Israel was unified was under David and a little bit of Solomon for 100 years. Amazing. And then the kingdom divided. And so we go through many cycles. And I guess if you've ever gone through a period of discouragement, or a Garden of Gethsemane, or a dark night of the soul, however you conceive of it, where you actually reach inside and you can't find your faculties of faith and love,
and you cry out,
and strength, and you cry out. Exactly. As Jesus did on the cross, why have you forsaken? But also, Jesus understood that he was not forsaken, but there is a human voice in us that does cry out. And especially when everything seems to fall apart at the same moment, which is actually a good sign, because it means that change is happening on the physical level of your life, and that old stuff has to be cleared away. It's like when you build a new house. It's very similar to building a new state of consciousness. It's not a piece of cake by any means, and I find it very seductive, that you get drawn in because it's God's desire that you express God fully. And so we get lured into this with the promise of eternal fulfillment, which is a true thing, but we don't realize the kind of steep path that it is. It's the inner work that is practiced reverently over a long period of time. And meanwhile, you begin to notice some benefits. And yes, you do improve. But if any of those old attitudes hang on, and some of them, as one teacher is fond of saying, are cherished beliefs that do not serve us, if we hold on to those, they can continue to trip us up. And we keep having, I pose the question not just to you personally, but to everyone. Have you not had a repetitive pattern in your life? I certainly have. So I can say that I have had a pattern that occurred over and over again. And now I got that one, but maybe there's another pattern that keeps repeating itself. We'll see. And that's why this is very relevant to our own development in consciousness. We have to be aware of these patterns that keep coming up. And that's when we kind of slip back and realize, oh, there is something else that I am putting before that integration within myself that is the most important relationship that I have. And that determines how I'm going to relate to the outer world. That determines if I'm going to have success in how I express my gift. And that determines how much good I can bring about for myself in terms of fulfillment, and the highest good in terms of raising consciousness in my particular sphere of influence. So I was involved in a discussion just today about a person who was talking about his dedication to the environment, and he wanted someone, he was looking for a relationship with someone who had the same dedication to the environment. And I thought, what does that mean, dedication to the environment? And I thought, if we are really dedicated to the environment, then we pay attention to our first environment, our body, our mind, and then we project the order, the good judgment, the strength, the faith from that place. That would be my understanding of dedication to the environment, and then in turn produces a higher consciousness of the wholeness of all of it, including the outer. That's just my understanding of the pattern and how it works. But I know that there are times of ebb and flow in the relative world. There are cycles of planets go through cycles, and the moon goes through cycles, and we're affected by that. And meanwhile, the spiritual law is woven into all levels of our being, and we're not yet kind of adjusted. That amoeba is changing its shape all the time. I remember last time you commented on the amoeba of being that development at different paces of the various faculties. One day our love can be strong. And love is very indiscriminate, extremely indiscriminate. Oh, I just love everything. I love the world. I love the problems. I love my family. I love everything. No, you don't. Not true. And then, but we have let's say a lack of judgment that day. We're very low in the judgment faculty. So we have to bring that into balance. And then one day our faith may be strong, but it wavers the next day. And so we have to bring that that constancy that comes from Andrew, the faculty of strength, from the lower back, which supports us in our expression of faith. Or our faith goes back and forth from the outer to the inner. All the faculties do that until they're fully developed, that we are expressing them in an outer way, judging by appearances, judging righteous judgment. Faith in the outer, faith in spirit. Strength meaning force, and strength meaning accomplishment through the spiritual strength inside. And all of the faculties are like that. We can have zeal, and if we have zeal in an outer way, I have had this, I can tell you, zeal in an outer way for various causes, but that zeal had to shift for something intangible so that I could be able to express that in a constructive way, in an outer way. Anyway, I hope that answers some of it.
Well, it does, and I know that you said in one place in one of your other classes in the series about, and what I see here is through this in just start beginning the book of Judges is movement, and I think you said sometime back that whenever we see movement, there's movement in us, and so we're an evolutionary we're in an evolutionary process in consciousness, and so and it's always moving, and like the amoeba, it goes here and it's taken there, but we need to know where our strength is. We need to know our connection to our source, and that's where the confidence in going into the silence, that whole scripture, that will keep him in perfect peace, whose mind is stayed on thee.
Exactly.
And we do that when we go into the silence and practicing the presence in the silence.
Yes, and also you remember at the end of the last class, the last thing that happened was the allotment of territory to the various tribes of Israel. And the first thing that we discover after going into the silence, they got into the promised land. But they only got as far as Jericho, really. And the first thing that we need to discover is how each of these 12 spiritual faculties function. You know, I encourage the classes when I've taught the 12 powers, what is faith? Faith is the perceiving power of the mind. If you can't perceive the invisible substance, how can you form and shape it? You can't. And
you can't perceive, you can't receive.
Pardon?
I said, if you can't perceive, you can't receive.
That, yes, exactly right. And so the faculty of judgment, it has to be discerning. It has to be discriminating. We have to make good, sensible, wise decisions. We have to make good judgment. And the only way we can be sure of that is to make that decision from that place of silence within us. If we, as I've said, if we judge by appearances, it's a very limited perception. We don't have a lot to work with. And those are unwise decisions that are made from appearances. Say you read the newspaper and you see the stock market is going down and you rush out and you withdraw all your money. Unwise decision. People would have said that it was unwise of Barak to go down to the river in the rainy season to meet this huge army of the Canaanites. But it was exactly the right thing because it's what defeated them. We don't always see the logic of the guidance that we receive, but each faculty has a very distinct function. And then when we understand that, then we can begin to join them consciously with other faculties. So if you have a day that, say, this day is not going very comfortably, and you can ask yourself, which faculty needs to be called forth? When you call forth your disciples, your inner disciples, you are recognizing their power. So maybe you can say, I made an unwise decision. I made an impulsive decision. And that had consequences. So I'm receiving the consequences of that. You can more easily understand the ups and downs of your own life if you recognize the function of the faculties. And I
have one quick question. I know it's late and we're almost closing time.
Oh.
But would you say, it seems that the whole notion of the judges, could you say then that metaphysically they represent divine ideas or inspiration?
They are
inspiration and revelation, because the judges are called to, thou goes before me to make the crooked places straight. So in a sense, the judges represent that tool that brings us back into proper alignment.
Absolutely. That's why God felt pity for the oppression of the people and appointed a judge. It's definitely a divine idea of judgment that leads them back to the one power and one presence. So next week we'll talk about Gideon, and he's a very interesting judge. And if we have time, we will do another judge.
I'm looking forward to it. This was very good tonight. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. I'll talk to you soon. And so,
okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye. So we'll close. Let's close our eyes for a moment and remember that our faculty of judgment, that we all have the capacity to make wise decisions quickly. We don't have to weigh things back and forth, although judgment is associated with justice. But wise decisions come from that infallible guidance that only comes from that connection with judgment and love. Love being our connection to the source, judgment being the discernment and the discrimination. And so we become mindful of how we make decisions and choices. And we can look at the results in our lives quite easily. Look at the conditions of your body, look at the state of mind, look at the general quality of the things that are happening in your lives. And for that awareness of the truth that sets us free, we are so grateful. And we do give thanks in the name and through the power of that living, loving Christ presence. Amen. And for those of you at home, if you would like to contribute to the New Foundation School of Metaphysical Bible Study, I invite you to hold your love offering in your hand and bless it with an awareness of that infinite source, that one source, infinite substance. There is but one giver and one gift. We know that as we give, so we receive. And with an awareness of that infinite source, we give freely and with love, knowing that already more good is on its way to us. And as we send our gifts forth, We bless our gifts with our offertory statement, divine love through me blesses and multiplies all the good I give and all the good I receive. And let's affirm that together. Divine love through me blesses and multiplies all the good I give and all the good I receive. And so I thank you all at home who are watching this broadcast. Thank you, Mark, even though you're traveling, for setting it up. Thank you, Linda, for attending. And read in your Bible the story of Gideon for next week. It's a fascinating story. Gideon is the guy who needs to have signs. And he is called upon to defeat a very difficult quality in consciousness called disharmony. Ooh, that's a hard one. The Midianites. And so read that and see what you can discern about that particular quality, that flavor of judgment. And so from the New Foundation, we wish you a blessed evening and a very good evening, and we'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Good night.